Hi there, Charger family. This is Mrs. Boyd and Mrs. Boyd's Math Room. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to be talking about bisectors of triangles. A perpendicular bisector means you are working with right angles. Whoa! Right angles and congruent segments. So there are going to be lots of right angles and lots of segments that are the same, in other words. So where this bisector intersects with line BC, it makes a right angle. It also tells us that those two parts are congruent. Where this bisector intersects AC, it makes a right angle, and it tells us that those parts are congruent. Where this bisector intersects AB, we know this is a right angle, and these parts, these segments, are congruent. Word you're going to want to know, circumcenter is where the perpendicular, not perpendicular, perpendicular bisectors meet. So this point right here is the circumcenter where all of those perpendicular bisectors meet. We know point D is the circumcenter of ABC. That means that BE, segment BE, is congruent to line segment AE. That little bar on there means line segment, by the way. So those two are congruent. We know that if AF, line segment AF, is congruent to FC, segment FC, and segment CG is congruent to segment BG. The distance from the circumcenter to the vertices is congruent. So line segment AD, which is not on here, but it would be a line from this vertex to the circumcenter, is going to be congruent with segment BD and congruent with segment CD. So the distance from all the vertices to the circumcenter is the same. That means triangle AED So if I draw a line there, triangle AED is congruent to triangle BED. So I can draw this same line between B and D, and AED and BED are congruent. I can also draw a line from D to C and say that AFD and triangle CFD are congruent. Finally, I can say that triangle BGD and triangle CGD are also congruent. So those triangles made by the lines from the circumcenter to the vertices are congruent. The circumcenter can be on the interior or exterior or side of a triangle. So if we have an acute triangle like this one, then we want to draw some bisectors. Mine are probably Not very good. But the circumcenter is right there in the center of the triangle. If we have an obtuse triangle, like this one here, sorry, dog's barking. And one more is going to look like that or so. That is going to have a circumcenter outside the triangle. Last but not least, a right triangle is going to have a circumcenter that's on the hypotenuse or on the side. All right, let's keep on going. Angle bisector means you're working with congruent angles. And an Ncenter is where the angle bisectors meet. So an angle bisector cuts every angle in half. So though these two angles are congruent, these two angles are congruent, and these two angles are congruent because these angles are split by the angle bisector. This point in the center is now called the Ncenter. Previously, we had the circumcenter. This is the Ncenter. Let's scoot it on down here. Point D is at the Ncenter of triangle ABC. So we have angle EAD. We're missing an A on here, so let's fix that. Excuse me. So triangle AED is going to be congruent to triangle AFD. Likewise, triangle FCD is going to be congruent to triangle GCD. Last but not least, triangle GBD will be congruent to triangle EBD. Okay, so the angle bisectors split up each of those portions of the triangle into congruent triangles. The perpendicular distance from the Ncenter to the sides is congruent. So side, let's call this H and I, not a squiggly line, but a straight one, and J. Perpendicular distance from HD is congruent to segment ID, congruent to segment JD. The Ncenter is always in the interior of a triangle. So if we have an acute triangle, the Ncenter, it cuts these angles in half. There or so. Man, my lines are not very good. An obtuse triangle cuts these in half. There's the Ncenter. And a right triangle has an Ncenter right there. Okay, we're just using these tidbits to know more about the triangle, how they're related to each other, and be able to determine parts of the triangle that we couldn't have otherwise found. I hope this makes some sense. If not, let me know. You know how to find me, and I hope to see you soon.